Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
We've covered the cases of over 100 missing people since we started the show. Oftentimes, these stories remain mysteries. Other times, we get some answers, and in a rare few, some form of justice. These stories stay with us long after we stop recording, and I try to keep up with any news that may break. This week, I'd like to share some updates with you on a few of our cases that we've covered. The disappearances of Michael Vaughan, Alicia Navarro, and Codi Bigsby. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And we're the husband and wife team behind this podcast. Each week, I tell you the story of an unsolved missing persons case. Ethan generally doesn't know anything about the case going into the episode, and he is here to provide his reactions and questions in real time, hopefully asking some of the same ones you have at home. Now, I changed my little spiel a little bit this week because we're doing something a bit different. You, of course, do know about these cases because they are all ones that we have covered before on this show. Though not all of these stories have happy endings, it's still gratifying to at least have three that have some forward momentum and new information that we can share with you all.
I have a feeling that the Michael Vaughan one is going to make me cry.
I mean, yeah, it's not good. I mean, the ones where it's young children are always the toughest. Yeah, so it's going to be tough, but there are definitely some bright spots. But before we get started, I do want to give a content warning because this is going to be a rough episode. Unfortunately, we're going to be talking about some tough subjects, including physical and sexual abuse against children. So if that's not something you can handle right now, we completely understand, and we will see you next week. So now let's get into the case updates for Michael Vaughan, Alicia Navarro, and Codi Bigsby. On July 27th, 2021, 5-year-old Michael Vaughan's father went to go check on Michael's younger sister and order a pizza. He was out of the room for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but when he came back, his little boy was gone. Police in Fruitland, Idaho, along with other agencies, launched a massive search, but no trace of the boy was found. Over a year and a half went by until seemingly out of nowhere, an arrest was made. We released our original episode on Michael on December 12th, 2021, and our up-to-date episode on the arrest on November 20th, 2022. Since then, a lot has happened. Just over a year prior to this recording, police arrested Sarah Wandra for failure to report a death in relation to Michael Vaughan's disappearance. Fruitland police later named 3 other persons of interest in Michael's case: Sarah's husband, Stacy Wandra, and Adrian Lucien and Brandon Shirtliff, who were apparently living with the couple at the time, and this home was located in the same neighborhood as the Vaughan family. Investigators spent several days searching the Wandra home and excavating both their backyard and that of their neighbors, but apparently nothing was found. Stacy Wandra was already in jail on unrelated federal firearms charges. Sarah was initially deemed unfit to stand trial, but by March 2023, she was deemed fit after additional evaluations at the state hospital. However, the next month, in April, the Payette County prosecutor ended up dismissing the case without prejudice. That does mean that it can be brought to trial again.
Okay.
So basically, the charges that she had against her relating to Michael Vaughan's disappearance were dismissed.
Is that because of lack of evidence?
They did not say.
Okay. But they dismissed it in a way that the charges could be brought back.
Right.
Okay.
Now, Sarah wasn't released, however. She remained in jail facing gun charges in an unrelated case. On October 6, 2023, she was sentenced on those charges. The first count was aggravated assault with a deadly weapon or instrument. On that, Sarah was sentenced to 3 years determinate, 2 years indeterminate with the Idaho Department of Corrections and related fees. The second count was for evidence destruction, alteration, or concealment. For that, Sarah received a sentence for no determinate time, but 2 years of indeterminate time, and was given a 228-day credit for time served. Which, I mean, this is clearly like an Idaho thing because I've never heard of a
determinate and indeterminate. What does that mean?
I have no idea. Like, how do you sentence to somebody to an indeterminate time? Like, the whole point of sentencing is to determine the time.
Yeah, I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, I am not sure either. So any Idaho lawyers out there want to let us know? That is very strange. Sarah is also facing a federal charge of unlawful possession of a firearm. This federal charge is due to her previous conviction for attempted robbery. Her trial for this case is scheduled for December 4th, 2023.
So coming up.
Yeah, very, very shortly. And I should mention that we talked about all of these previous charges and, the armed robbery and all that kind of stuff in our update episode of Michael Vaughan, where we discuss her arrest. So while Sarah Wanderer remains in custody, her husband, Stacy, was just released from federal prison on November 9th, 2023, after serving 21 months. And this was following his guilty plea on an unlawful possession of a firearm charge. So basically the same thing that Sarah is getting ready to face. While he is currently free, as far as we know, he is still considered a suspect in Michael Vaughan's disappearance. But he's out. I mean, I don't know where he is exactly, if he's back in the house where he lived with Sarah, in the neighborhood where the Vaughans still live, or if he went somewhere else. But yeah, as of November 9th, he's out of prison. And police really have been, pretty tight-lipped about all of this, but haven't really publicly said much about Stacy at all.
Oh, I'm sure they're keeping an eye on him.
Yeah. So where does that leave Michael's case? At the end of September 2023, Payette County Prosecutor Mike Duke told the Argus Observer that he fully intends to prosecute this case, saying, quote, "I expect to charge it, but there are a lot of complexities and I'm being careful with that," end quote. The Facebook page devoted to bringing Michael home changed its name to Monkey's Missing Children Project of Idaho. Remember, Monkey was the nickname that Michael's family had given him. Around the time of the name change, page administrators put out the following statement. Quote, "The recommended charges and reports have gone to the prosecutor and they are waiting for the grand jury. It appears charges are forthcoming in the near future. As for Sarah Wanderer, she was sentenced on unrelated charges and will be remaining in custody at this time. It is unknown as to whether she's included in the grand jury file," end quote. We know nothing, other than there is some sort of case with a grand jury, but we don't know who's involved and who isn't. Because, there was a big push from law enforcement to find these other two guys, Adrian and Brandon, and, there was a whole thing I don't know. One of them did some YouTube lives, I think, the mom spoke. It was just like a whole messy situation, but neither one of them was ever arrested for anything having to do with Michael. And Stacy, again, is out of prison and also has not been arrested, though he has only been out by, at the time of this recording, 2-3 weeks.
Do they know where the other two are?
I believe they did locate them.
They just haven't made any arrests.
Right.
Yet.
It's tough because as I was writing this, a bunch of Facebook, memories and stuff popped up, and it was the 1-year anniversary of Sarah Wanderer's arrest. And what we thought at the time was like a huge break in the case. Like, we thought this was going to be over, you know?
Yeah.
They arrested somebody. We, of course, did not want that outcome because she, was arrested for failure to report a death. But at least, again, it would be answers. It would at least stop Michael's family from going through the indeterminate hell of not knowing where their child is. So I think there was a lot of hope, along with just sadness and, every other horrible emotion when Sarah was arrested, and then to have the charges dropped this spring.
Still with no answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was just really, really tough because police were out at their house for a long time. I mean, they searched every inch. And, obviously they didn't make public, I'm sure a lot of things that they did find.
Sure. Yeah.
But we know that they didn't find Michael. So we don't know at this point, based on that Facebook statement, where they don't know if Sarah is included in those grand jury charges. Like, we don't know if this is a case where they're just trying to gather more evidence right now, or if this was some sort of red herring.
Yeah.
And, maybe these people aren't involved at all. Because, we still don't know where the original information came from, like what made them believe.
For the original charge of failure to report a death. And like, that's also a weird charge to charge somebody with if they don't have a body.
Well, I think that, it is, but I think it's just one of those like lesser charges. I think we see this a lot in cases that are similar to this, where they try to hit them with lesser charges to preserve the ability to charge them with the larger ones, once they do get the body or get more information. Mm-hmm. But this one's so hard because we really did think we had answers a year ago. And it's the end of 2023 now, and we still don't know. This case is obviously active and ongoing, so we'll be keeping an eye on it, and we will be sure to keep you updated. And hopefully those answers that everybody is looking for will come soon. I ran away. I will be back. I swear. I'm sorry. Jessica Nunez awoke on the morning of September 15th, 2019, and found that note in her daughter Alicia's room. Alicia Navarro's 15th birthday was only 5 days away, but she was gone. Jessica immediately believed that her daughter had been lured away from her Glendale, Arizona home by an online predator. For the next 4 years, she remained vigilant, searching for her daughter, talking to reporters, and posting on social media, all in hopes of raising awareness about Alicia's disappearance and eventually locating her. We aired our original episode on Alicia Navarro's disappearance on April 6, 2022, and on July 27, 2023, we had the absolute pleasure of airing an episode announcing that Alicia had been found safe. Though this was a happy ending for sure, it wasn't exactly the happy, tearful reunion that I'm sure Jessica had been hoping for. On July 26, police officials in Havre, Montana, a small town close to the Canadian border and nearly 1,400 miles north of Alicia's home in Glendale, announced that Alicia Navarro, who by then was 18, had been located. Alicia walked into the police station and asked to be removed from the missing persons list. Now that she was legally an adult and free to do as she wished, she apparently wanted to be able to live her life out of hiding. She wanted to be able to get an ID and other documents that she could only access if she wasn't considered to be a missing juvenile. Trent Steele, president of the Anti-Predator Project, was beside Jessica Nunez's side throughout her family's nearly 4-year search for Alicia. Though they had received thousands of tips over the course of the years from each coast of the U.S. and even Canada, Europe, and Mexico, neither he nor anyone else investigating Alicia's case had any idea how or why she ended up in Montana. While Alicia may have been expecting a quick trip to the police to tell them she wasn't missing, it, of course, turned into a much bigger deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't even know how, but it seems like this took her off guard.
Okay.
A lot of people who follow this case, including myself, we were hoping for the Hollywood ending with Jessica and her family flying to Montana to reunite with her daughter. Like, that's, when I first saw that, I said, great. I was assuming that like Alicia's entire family was on the next plane and we were going to get this like amazing, tearful, heartfelt reunion. Because we have seen that before, right? Like we saw that with Elizabeth Smart, with JC Duggar, like these people who had been missing long term, and they were found, they're reunited, like they escaped, but that's not what happened here. Alicia seemingly wasn't ready to return home. And while Jessica did get to have a short FaceTime call in order to briefly speak with Alicia and verify her identity, that was about it. After that, Alicia returned to her home in Montana while investigators from multiple agencies tried to figure out just what the hell had been going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of time unaccounted for.
Right. But, so she's 18 at this time, right? So like they couldn't they couldn't arrest her. Like they couldn't make her stay.
No. But I mean, they can certainly start investigating like the circumstances of who she's living with, where she's been for the past 4 years, what the person who she's living with had to do with that.
Right. And that is definitely exactly what they did. Soon after she was located, detectives served a search warrant at a Montana home. 4 people were interviewed, but no arrests were made at that time. And those 4 people were not named. In the following days, reporters hounded the Havre apartment where Alicia had been living with a 36-year-old man named Edmund Eddie Davis. In early August, Alicia and Davis packed up their belongings and moved into Davis's mother's trailer home on the Fort Belknap Reservation, a move which did not please tribal members. So, and that's what I mean when I said that this seems to have like caught her off guard. I mean, I guess we're not expecting, for some reason, people to be interested in what had been going on for the past 4 years. And, while I'm not condoning like reporters camping out at their apartment and like, they were harassing the neighbors and, knocking on everybody's door trying to get them to talk. But like, this was a big story.
Yeah.
And she's found and people want to know what's going on. So 4 days later, somewhere around then, they packed up the apartment they left. They moved in with Davis's mom. Speaking to reporters, resident Cheryl Hum said, quote, "His family is supporting him, but all the rest of the community not wanting this. Just because he's here doesn't mean we want him here," end quote. Another tribal member, J.R. Healy, who is part of a men's group that is part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, told reporters, quote, "Me and some of the MMIW people, we want to try to get her away from him," end quote. And then he went on to say that he wanted to get a certified advocate to speak with Alicia while Davis wasn't around.
Wow.
Well, yeah, I mean, because again, you've got these people who are on a tribal reservation who missing and murdered Indigenous women, especially, but, men too, people, it's a huge epidemic. And so they've got their own issues going on. And then they've got this 36-year-old guy moving in with his 18-year-old person who had been missing, since she was 14. And yeah, they're like, do not bring this here. We've got our own stuff. And, we've seen this before. Like, we don't want this. So yeah, people were not happy and they identified Alicia as somebody who seemingly they needed to help. Whether they were able to ever do that, we don't know. But even though Alicia was a legal adult, kind of like we said, that wasn't going to stop investigators from looking into Eddie Davis and exactly how the young woman ended up living with him. Jessica, who must have been going through a range of emotions, said that she wasn't going to speak to the press during this time, which you could understand. Like, it's so tough, I mean, she knows her daughter's alive. She knows her daughter. Well, she doesn't really know that she's safe. She knows
Yeah.
that she's physically, seemingly okay.
Yeah.
But
beyond that, she's got no answers.
right.
Herself.
And, Alicia wasn't talking to her. So she still had her own questions, and it was just a very delicate time. So, I completely understand why she wanted to stay out of the public eye, while they kind of figured things out behind the scenes. So Alicia's case went quiet for the next few months until late October of 2023, when Eddie Davis was arrested on child sex abuse charges. On October 24th, 2023, Eddie Davis was arrested in Chinook, Montana, and remanded to the Hill County Detention Center on a $1 million bond. Davis was arrested on 2 felony counts of child sexual abuse based on images found on his phone. Now, a lot of people immediately thought that these images were related to Alicia. While it remains unknown if Davis was involved in her disappearance or if some of those images were related to Alicia, neighbors say that the pair had been living in the apartment together in Havre for at least a year, which would have made Alicia underage at the time that they moved in.
Right.
However, according to the affidavit, what police found on his phone went far beyond whatever his relationship was with Alicia. So again, I want to put in a content warning here. I'm not going to go into details, of course, but this is extremely disturbing. According to police, dozens of images of suspected child sex abuse were found on Davis's phone. The charges describe the images as involving prepubescent. This happens a lot. I research this and I write it and I'm fine, but when it gets to actually talking about it, the charges describe the images as involving prepubescent girls, infants, and toddlers. Trent Steele said that following the arrest, Alicia was in a safe place, but declined to share details for obvious reasons. He also told reporters that more charges against Davis were possible, but, quote, "The decision was to charge him with the most obvious crimes, the most serious crimes, and the one that we can probably make stick without having to re-traumatize anybody," end quote. The charges against Davis both carry hefty prison sentences. The charge of child sexual abuse can result in life in prison, and knowingly possessing electronic images of a child or children under 12 engaged in sexual conduct carries a 100-year prison sentence. I think that comment by Trent Steele is really important. And prison sentences for charges like this vary wildly based on your jurisdiction. So it seems like Montana obviously has some pretty hefty sentences. So the 2 charges, 100 years and life, are the maximum of what he's going to get, which it doesn't really get much higher than that.
What's the minimum for those?
I don't know.
Well,
but
it seems as though he's going away for a long time.
Right. And so I think Trent brings up a good point, is that, they found the images on his phone. It's not like the victims need to testify in
Right.
cases like that. It's
Right.
basically like, we found the images. If a jury decides, yeah, those were on your phone and they're there because you put them there, it's a pretty easy case to convict. And if they can get those convictions and they can get him, even if it's not the maximum, just some sort of lengthy prison sentence, one, good, just in general. I mean,
right.
if he's found guilty, absolutely, he should get whatever sentence the judge deems for that. But if he is found guilty, gets a hefty sentence, and during the course of investigation, the investigators believe that he was involved in Alicia's actual disappearance, if, as Jessica always suspected, Alicia was lured away by somebody she met online, if Davis is responsible for that, then Alicia and her family can get justice without having to go through a trial, without her having to testify. And, who knows how she'll feel down the line, hopefully with a lot of support and a lot of therapy, she will come to the understanding that what happened when she was 14 was not her running off with Prince Charming.
I mean, at the very, very least, it gets him away from her.
Right.
So that she can start healing and understanding what happened to her.
Yeah. And if he is found guilty of these charges, he's off the streets and can't hurt anybody else.
Right.
On Monday, November 20th, Davis pleaded not guilty to the charges. He is currently being held on a $1 million bond, but his lawyer has said that he is going to apply for bail reduction. No hearings have been scheduled as of this recording. On November 1st, though, we got some amazing news in Alicia's case. After, by this point, over 4 years, the now 19-year-old woman was reunited with her mother.
Good.
Alicia's family no longer lives in Arizona, but she is with them. Alicia and the rest of her family have a long road ahead of them, but hopefully this is the beginning of what will eventually be their happy ending. Four-year-old Codi Bigsby was reported missing from Hampton, Virginia on January 31st, 2022, after his father, Codi Bigsby, said he woke up and found his son's bed empty. A search immediately ensued, and police took Codi's father, Corey, down to the station for questioning. This interview led to Corey being arrested on multiple charges of child neglect. After several hearings, a grand jury was convened, and on June 5th, 2023, Codi Bigsby was indicted for the murder of his son, Codi. We originally covered Codi's case on March 10th, 2023, and our first update episode talking about Corey's murder indictment was released on June 17th, 2023. Since then, there have been several more hearings, and upsetting details have emerged involving alleged statements that Corey made about his son's death. In a June 8th hearing, we learned that the murder indictment states that prosecutors believe Codi's murder occurred on or about June 18th, 2021, nearly 7 months before Corey reported Codi missing. One of Codi's aunts testified that she recalled speaking with Codi around Thanksgiving 2020, but that was the last conversation anyone in the little boy's family ever recalled having with him. Codi Bigsby's charges in his son's death came after months of competency hearings related to the child neglect charges. Corey was initially deemed unfit to stand trial for the original charges after testimony that mental health staff at the Hampton jail said that Bigsby had reported hearing voices, had made references to seeing children tapping on the windows of the jail, and said that there is a machine in his head telling him to do crazy things. He was ordered to undergo restoration services at Eastern State Hospital. The successful completion of these services led to Corey being deemed fit to stand trial and then to the additional charges being levied against him. Since our last episode, there have been several more pretrial hearings in Corey's case. His trial for the murder was originally stated to begin on November 6th, 2023, but it has been postponed. During Corey's incarceration, he allegedly made incriminating statements to different jail employees and also wrote a letter that some characterized as a confession or a suicide note. When asked about her characterization of the letter this past summer, Bigsby's attorney, Amina Matheny Willard, said, quote, "Because the statement is verifiably untrue, nonsensical, and bizarre, I do not consider it either one," end quote. In a hearing that took place just a few weeks before this recording on November 8th, the court heard a defense motion to suppress. According to 13 News Now, the prosecution put multiple Hampton Roads Regional Jail officers on the stand who shared a series of statements allegedly made by Codi Bigsby. And this is where we get details, according to these officers. One officer testified that on August 3rd, 2022, Codi Bigsby got his attention around 1:30 a.m. and then dictated a statement to him. The statement read, quote, "Found my son unresponsive, tried to give CPR, could not revive him. Tried several times. I begged God to save him. I decided to walk outside and spoke with God. Back to house, check on my son to see if he was breathing, and tried a long time to realize he was not coming back. I put him in a trash bag, put him in my car, which sat for 3 days." End quote. The officer's supervisor testified that the officer who took the statement was distraught later in the shift. The officer said, quote, "I had to leave the building to gather myself. You think you've seen it all after 20 years in the military. This moved me to a different mental state." End quote. The supervisor said that she then turned on her body camera, went to Corey's cell, and asked him to write another statement for her. In this statement, he said, quote, "I, Codi J. Bigsby Sr., am confessing that on January 30th, 2022, I stepped outside of my apartment to get some items out of my car to wash clothes, and when I returned, I found my son Codi Josiah Bigsby laying at the bottom of the steps unresponsive. He must have fallen. I then tried to revive him by administering CPR several times over and over until I couldn't anymore. Then I prayed. I stepped outside for a few minutes and talked to God as I prayed. I asked God to allow my son a second chance. Then I administered CPR again, but got no response, so I panicked and prayed. After that, I placed him into a trash bag, and I placed him in the back of my truck. On the 21st of January, around 3:30 a.m., I took him to Garrett A. Morgan Boulevard and placed him into a receptacle bin. After I realized it was a trash can, took him out and put him into a hole I dug beside a tree inside the tree line. He has tape around his ankles and wrist, a cowboy rug under him, Beats headphones in his ears. I then ate and placed his bike in some trash after I ate at the scene." End quote.
Okay, so his first statement, he said he found him unresponsive in his bed. Now he's saying that he found him unresponsive at the bottom of the stairs and he must have fallen. Why?
So the first one didn't say bed specifically. It just said, "Found my son unresponsive, tried to give CPR, could not revive him."
Okay. Why were his hands and feet bound?
I don't know.
I mean, that to me, that's not...
Unless it was, I mean, yeah, it would make sense to the extent of, this is fucking terrible, placing him in a bag and then wrapping tape around the bag, right? But that's not feet and wrists specifically, right?
Yeah.
In that scenario. If you find somebody unresponsive and then you give CPR and you can't revive them, then yeah, there's no reason to tie the
restrain
wrists and ankles. Yeah.
Right. That to me says something much worse.
These two written confessions don't exactly match up, but they have a lot of the same elements to them. But a third officer testified that several months later, they found a letter in Bigsby's jail cell in his notebook where Bigsby allegedly wrote that he hit Codi's head on the floor, hit him with his fists, put him in the fridge, and buried him. Now, this is still somewhat similar to the testimony of the two previous officers. I mean, except that instead of finding him unresponsive, he's admitting to directly causing his death.
Yeah.
But there's one main difference. This letter said that Codi's death occurred on June 18th, 2021. If true, this means that Codi never lived to see his 4th birthday, which was on January 12th, 2022. Codi Bigsby's attorney, Amina Matheny Willard, also put several law enforcement witnesses on the stand in an attempt to show that her client was tortured and coerced into writing those statements, and therefore they shouldn't be allowed in court. Because remember, this was a motion to suppress hearing. Now, during this hearing, Matheny Willard also secured the judge's permission to have one of Codi's siblings testify at the trial in a separate courtroom with the testimony to be live streamed into Corey's courtroom. So we can expect to hear from at least one of Corey's children at his trial. Now, the article said that this child is 6, and I don't know if they mean that the child is currently 6 or was 6 at the time. So in addition to this ruling, which, typically isn't done if the child testifying is not a victim of the crime, they still decided that it would be too traumatic for him to be in the courtroom. So in addition to ruling that this child would be allowed to testify remotely, the judge also ruled that these jailhouse statements that Corey made would be allowed in at trial.
Good. And I understand that his defense attorney has a job to do, but fuck her.
It's tough though, because
those statements were made, and then she comes up with this crazy story that he was abused in jail by them.
Well, it's
coerced
it's
into
not
making
so
that
crazy
statement.
though, because it was already found that during his initial interrogation, which lasted for multiple days, that his constitutional rights were violated. That while he should have been free to go, while he should have been able to get his attorney, he was not allowed to do that. So there is an actual basis for this.
But that's not the same people.
No, you're right. It's not the same people, but I'm just saying it's not coming out of nowhere. Like it was already proven that his constitutional rights were violated when he was first arrested. And she was saying back over the summer, before these details came out. But again, this was, I think, the basis of the original murder indictment. So when we talk about this in the update episode, her basic idea at that point was that, I think she said something to the effect of, he lost his child and then he lost his mind, saying that because of the way he was treated and because of his, incarceration that happened the day he reported his son missing, that he had a complete break with reality. And that's how this all started. And, he was deemed unfit to stand trial at the beginning. So there's, again, some basis for that as well. So I'm not... Please, I don't want people saying that I'm defending him, because I'm not, but I think that context is important to bring up in this, that this isn't a case of she's just throwing shit up against the wall. There are reasons that she's making these particular points in this case. But with all of that said, the reason he was arrested in the first place after reporting his son missing is because his story didn't make any fucking sense. If you go back and listen to our original episode on Codi's disappearance, Codi Bigsby's story does not add up in any way. And even in that episode, I said that it strongly reminded me of the case of Orrin and Orson West. And as you know, if you're, a listener of this show, Jacqueline and Trezell West have been convicted of their children's murder. There's just a lot of context to all of this, right? And though his story changes in all 3 of those statements, they all have him storing his son's body for some indeterminate period of time and burying him.
Right, disposing of him.
Yeah, and in those first 2 letters, he said, that he buried him in the same road, which I believe is in Maryland. I'm not sure about the one that they found later in his journal, if he mentions where he was buried. But again, even though Corey wrote that, said, I buried him on this road, and then in that one statement said that he ate food and left it there, meaning there's trash and things that who knows if it's there, but
and his bike.
And his bike, right?
Right.
Actual items that would have fingerprints, DNA, et cetera, et cetera. Codi Bigsby has not been found. So I think that also needs to be taken into consideration when you think about these confessions, is that he gave them a location, of course, not an exact location, But Codi still hasn't been found. So I don't know where the truth lies. In my completely unprofessional opinion, do I think that Codi Bigsby was involved in his son's death? Yes, I do. I mean, I absolutely do. But how that happened, when that happened, where it happened, like, I couldn't tell you any of that, right?
Right.
In June 2023, after spending over a year in custody and being denied bond, I believe a total of 8 times, Codi Bigsby walked out of jail on an $80,000 bond.
Why was he granted bond?
Well, it's interesting because, the 8 it was between 6 and 8 bond hearings that he previously had were on those child neglect charges. And he was denied bond every single time. But what's fascinating is that he was granted this $80,000 bond on the murder charge.
And so low.
Yeah. And so I don't know if, that's like income driven, because some jurisdictions do have that.
Sure.
But yeah, it's an $80,000 bond. Now, he's not just free.
No, I'm sure he's being monitored.
He is. He remains under strict supervision and is required to wear an electronic monitoring device. He's living with his adult daughter in Norfolk, Virginia, and is prohibited from contacting his other children, his minor children.
I'm not entirely sure that him living with an adult child is good either.
I would agree, but I mean, it's one of those things. She's an adult.
She's an adult.
So
right.
She gets to decide. We also talk about in the original episode on Codi's disappearance that all of these children were living with Codi and not with their mother, who is living in Washington, D.C. But the remaining children are apparently back with their mother now. Codi Bigsby's trial for the murder of his son, Codi Bigsby, is now slated to begin on March 4th, 2024. We'll be bringing you updates on that once it's underway, as well as updates on any other developments in the stories that we've covered. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheywere.gone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, and Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by me, Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Enkel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!